So once you've made your quilt top, you have your batting and your backing picked, it's time to put those layers together. And that's what I'm talking about today. Welcome to Epida Studio. My name is Elizabeth and I help you make beautiful things with quilting, bojagi, and embroidery. So in quilting, you have your 3 layers, your main patchwork piece, your batting, and your backing. And if you have questions about any of those, you can go back in this series to make your first quilt series, and I go through in detail how to make those. And now today I'm going to be talking about putting those layers together. And this technique is called basting. Now, full disclosure, this is my least favorite part of the whole quilting process, but I'm going to walk you through a couple different options of choices that you have for how to do this and what to look out for and what I do. So I'm going to be doing this with my simple rail fence quilt that you've seen in the other videos, but it's the same process regardless of what quilt top you are using. So for this, you're gonna need some kind of a big surface. And I know some people like to do this on a floor and they'll lay everything out flat on the floor. And to be honest, I don't have a piece of floor in my house that's big enough for that. And I also have a cat that likes to crawl around. So I don't normally baste on the floor. Normally I do basting on a table, and I do happen to have a really large table. So you can work with whatever you have. If you are in a really limited space and you don't have that, then maybe you could look for another option like a quilt shop or a community center, library, someplace where they might have a big table that you would be able to use. So be creative with that. Because I'm working on a table, I'm gonna have to do a couple of things differently because I can't have my whole quilt laid out at once, but I'm gonna explain those as I go. Now, when we have our 3 layers, we wanna have those held together so that when we go to quilting, then they're not going to be shifting around and moving. So that's the whole purpose of this, is to hold them together securely. And there are a couple of ways that you can hold them together. So one of the traditional ways is using safety pins. You can use safety pins of different sizes. You can get special safety pins like this one that have a bend in them. Those are specifically designed to be able to go through your quilt and make it easier to put them in and take them out. So pinning is a fine option. I have done some quilts with pinning, but my personal preference is to use basting spray. So this is a temporary glue. So think of it kind of like a post-it note that you can stick on and then peel it off. So it's temporary adhesive that will hold the layers together. So you can purchase this. There are a couple of different brands. Just be sure that when you're getting the adhesive that it is temporary. You don't want permanent adhesive. So you can get something like, for example, 505 is a common brand, and this we will spray on, and I'll show you how I use this. Another option is you can make your own homemade adhesive spray. And I found this recipe online and I've tried it a few different times and I really like it, to be honest. The main difference is with the homemade option is that it is temporary only briefly until it dries. So you have to spray it, get everything smooth, then you have to let it dry. And once it dries, you can't peel it off anymore. It's no longer temporary. So it works really well. This is a good option and it's much more economical than the other spray. So I'm just going to show you this one today so that I don't have to wait for many hours to let it dry. So to start off, I'm assuming that you have your batting that's the size you need, you have your backing fabric that's the size you need, and those should be slightly bigger than your quilt top. If you are at all unsure, lay everything out in a pile, batting or backing on the bottom, batting, quilt top, and make sure that everything is the right size. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our batting and we're going to lay it out on our surface. So I have my batting laid on the table here, and you'll notice right away that my table isn't wide enough for the whole quilt. It does hang down over the edge. So because of that, we have to be careful of that. We can't put our top on and have it hanging over, because this little fold is going to cause problems. So I'm only going to be working up to about 2 or 3 inches from the fold, and I will baste this part, and then when that's all smooth, then I can move the whole thing, and then that will eliminate the fold. I'll be able to move along. So with the size of this quilt, I will be able to do this in 2 sections. If it was an even larger quilt, I might have to do it in 3 or possibly 4 sections. But I'm starting with laying out my batting on the table, and then I'm going to get my backing fabric. So here's the backing fabric that I have, and this backing has 1 seam in it, and the seam is going to be going horizontally across the quilt. And now I'm going to lay this onto the backing, and I'm lining up, and I'm going to line up this corner so that this edge is lined up, because these pieces aren't exactly the same size, but I want to have one edge that's lined up. And this is where you just want to take your time and get everything smooth out. And I know a lot of people will tape down their backing fabric and then put the batting on top of it. I don't do that, and I'll show you why in a minute. But that does make this step a little bit trickier, because I have everything moving around. If it was taped down, it would be more still. I would only have one thing to move. So here's my backing fabric on, and you can see obviously this backing fabric is not smooth at all. I need to fix this. And I'll just do this by starting at one end and smoothing it out with my hands. And I want to make sure that this backing fabric is smooth, and also be feeling for the batting underneath to make sure that there aren't any lumps in there. And I remember in this section specifically, this is from the fold, from where the batting was folded on a roll. So I want to be extra careful in that section to make sure that that lays out smooth. And there's not a little lump there. You know, be careful when you're laying it out that if your backing fabric has a seam, make sure that the raw edges are going in towards the batting. So this is right side up. I'm looking at the right side of the fabric. Okay, so now it is all laid out pretty smooth. And I'm ready to begin the basting. And normally I would have this the other way. I would have it face toward me, and I have it going off the table there. But I'm just doing this a little backwards for the camera so that you can see what it looks like. So now that it's smooth, I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to fold over around 5 or 6 inches. And then I'm going to just fold it up again. So I'm kind of rolling it. And as I roll it, I'm taking one look for any loose threads that might be on the inside. And here we are. This is the edge of what I'm going to be able to work with on the table at one time. And there is this whole piece hanging down here. I'm just going to ignore that for right now and just work with what's in front of me. And so I'm checking that the batting is all smooth again. Now I'm going to take my spray baste and I'm going to spray, and you do not want to go overboard with basting spray. A little bit will go a long way. And I'm just going to put little sprays on here. Make sure you're in a ventilated area. Sometimes I even will wear a face mask when I'm using this. And then I will fold that over and then come back on the section that has the spray. I'll come and smooth that down. And then I'm just going to repeat doing this in little sections. And we can see that this is holding it. It is sticking to it, but it is a temporary spray. I could peel this off and then re-stick it. So if there are any pleats or bumps or anything, then I can peel it off and readjust it. So you want everything to be flat. I know some people will even get a ruler and they can use that to help smooth everything out. I usually just use my hands, but you'll find many people have different things that work for them. So feel free to watch a bunch of other videos, try different things, talk to people, and you'll find out what works the best for you. Now I've got it all the way to the edge. Now, if I'd used the homemade basting spray, I would have to stop here and let it sit for even 4 or 5 hours to let it dry. But because I'm using that spray, I can move right on to the next step. So for that, I'm going to slide it up. So now we can see this part that was folded down. Now this is laying flat. So you always want to be working on the flat surface. Don't try and work over the fold. But I'm sliding the whole thing up. And now I will go from this side. I'm going to fold this up, do the same. So I'm rolling it up about 5 or 6 inches. And then when I get to the part that I can feel has been stuck down, I know that's where I can stop, because I can feel that part is already basted. And now I'm going to repeat coming back the other way and look for little threads and things. So normally when I do this, I would be working on my really big table where many quilts can lay out flat. And I would also be walking around to both sides. I wouldn't be moving it as much on the table. I'm just doing that to keep it in one spot for the video. And when you're smoothing it out, it's usually easier if you start in the middle and then smooth out to the sides. And here's my last little section. Now I am spraying the backing. I'm not spraying the batting because the batting, the surface isn't as smooth, and so it would take a lot more of the spray to kind of get on the batting, if that makes sense, because it's all bumpy, and when you have a smooth surface, it'll stick on. So that's what I do with this. If I'm using the homemade spray based, I would probably spray both, and it does take a lot more of the spray to get it to stick, but it's significantly cheaper, so that doesn't matter as much. So now this is on. I'm just gonna, if I can make sure everything's nice and smooth. And then I'm gonna carefully flip the whole thing over so I can put the quilt top onto it. So once it's flipped over, I am gonna again just smooth it all out. This section where the fold is, I can see where the fold is, but with my hand it feels really smooth, so I think we're good with that. And then make sure there aren't any folds or anything in the backing. So now I'm going to get the quilt top and put that on the top. So here's my quilt top. One note that I didn't mention is to make sure everything is really pressed, make sure the backing is pressed, the quilt top is pressed before you begin. And if you use starch, this is a perfect time to use it, because starch will just help it be a little bit stiffer and lay out easier. So now I'm laying this out on top, and we can see in this section on the batting and the backing, I was lining up the edges so they're about the same size. But for the quilt top, I want to have a border around the edge, and ideally at least 3 inches around the edge, and that will help in the quilting. It will help so that if anything shifts, your quilt top will still have backing. It won't be shifting so that the backing is smaller. And also it'll give you something to hang on to. So even when you're sewing right along close to the edge, you'll still have something to hold on to. So that's just really helpful. So make sure you have that. And now I'm just doing the same process. I'm smoothing it out with my hands to make sure everything is smooth. And this is why you want your quilt top to be as flat as possible, because if there are any folds or pleats or anything, that's just going to make this process more difficult because it's not flat. So it's hard to smooth that flat if it's not flat to start off with. And this is why if your backing was pieced and the top of your quilt was pieced, then it would be more difficult to get everything smooth and flat. Okay, so I have everything laid out, and I can see on both sides there is a backing border around it. So I'm gonna do the similar thing. I'm gonna roll it up, and I'm only working with the part that is on the table. I'm staying away from this edge for right now. And here you can kind of feel that there is like would be a fold in the edge. But when I'm working with just the part that's on the table and staying away from that bend, then that will avoid any problems. So this time I'm smoothing out the top. I'm making sure there aren't any bumps in the batting, and I'm also feeling to make sure that the backing is still flat and smooth and that nothing has gone wonky there. So when that side's done, I'm going to come back in and do the side that's facing me. So here we go. Everything is basted and it's ready to go. Now, what I like to do now is I will very gently flip it over again and then smooth out the backing fabric again, starting in the middle. Just kind of pull it out because sometimes it gets a bit had it wrinkly in the process. So I'll smooth it out again. If you're using the homemade adhesive, you don't really need to do this step because you've let it dry in between and so it doesn't move around as much. But with this spray, this is a good step to add. So now that everything's held together and it's all nice and smooth, we're ready to begin quilting it on our home machine. And that's what the next video is going to be about. For more quilting tutorials, patterns, and inspiration, you can check out my website, epidastudio.com.